Thanks for tuning in to The Real Deal Show, brought to you by ebodyboarding.com and Tribe Boards.
Hey everybody, Jay Reale back at you with another episode of The Real Deal Show. And I am with a person who I've had on The Real Deal Show before. This guy is a maven of the media of bodyboarding. If you are ever on YouTube looking for instructional videos, you've probably seen this guy. This is Rob Barber. What's happening, Rob?
Thank you, Jay. Thanks for having me back.
You got it. No worries. We're on location at a secret, unnamed, tropical, exotic destination. Yes. And if any of you follow bodyboarding in the professional level, you could probably figure out where we are right now. But Rob and I thought we'd sit down here. And I should also mention, by the way, Rob is the owner of Bodyboard Holidays. And if you've ever been on one of their trips, you know how epic they are. And if you haven't, you should check it out. Bodyboard Holidays.
Bodyboard-holidays.com.
Sorry, I should know that off the back of my head, out of the recesses of my mind.
Bodyboard Holidays on Instagram as well. So,
yeah, and check it out.
And YouTube.
Yeah, and Vicky and I go on the Central America trip every year. Rob's been on our Tavarua trip. So if you ever want bodyboard coaching and you want to be videoed and have photos taken of you in an exotic location, or just want to travel with like-minded people, this is your man.
Thank you, Jay. Yeah, exactly. Nailed it.
There's your plug. Okay, $5 after we're done with this podcast.
It's all in the bank, for sure. we love having you and Vicky on our El Salvador and Costa Rica trips every year. It just adds to the fun.
Thank you, brother. I appreciate it. This will be our 6th time in 2025 going to El Salvador with you.
Yeah.
One of those was just like a feeler trip after the pandemic.
Post-pandemic recce.
Yeah, and there's just a couple of us, but yeah, we're going to be back again in 2025, Costa Rica, El Salvador, and there's a few spots left. So
yeah.
Okay, enough of the promos. Okay, the topic of this podcast today is really, for me, the demographics of bodyboarding and how they've changed over the years, and how they sort of relate now to the IBC World Tour, which, of course, is the IBC is the governing body of the professional side of the sport, at least on an international level. So, Rob, you've been around this sport. How many years have you been bodyboarding?
Since I was 10, 11 years old. I'm 48 now, so yeah, some time.
Quite a while. And for me, it's been 45 years. I started in the summer of 1979, and we're recording this in August of 2024. So you and I collectively have, probably close to 3/4 of a century in this sport, right? So we've seen it all. We've seen it come and go. And I want to ask you first, the early days of the sport, to me, were a very different vibe in the sport. Tell me your perspective on that, when you first started.
Yeah, well, the early days of the sport for me was kind of super young. It was growing so fast. It was the world's fastest growing water sport. There was Bodyboarding magazine, there was Riptide magazine, numerous other magazines. There was VHS videotapes being pumped out month by month, weren't there? By initially Tom Boyle, and then Chris Stroh and the other video producers. And there was a massive froth, wasn't there, about the sport? And it was kind of like a mystery to a certain extent, because there wasn't the connectivity that there is these days. The communication age wasn't upon us, was it? So we were only able to stay in touch by getting hold of magazines every couple of months usually. And it was also a little bit harder to get hold of equipment, and the equipment that you could get hold of was sort of limited. But there was these icons of the sport that you kind of got to see on these glossy magazine pages, which included you and Mike Stewart and Ben Paul Roach and all the other legends, Lanson and all those other riders that came out of Australia then, there was Ben Holland and all that crew as well. So yeah, it was kind of, there was a huge excitement about it, wasn't there?
Yeah.
That's the best way to describe it. And it was just everywhere you went, bodyboarding was just sort of, there was pods of growing bodyboard communities all over the world.
Yeah, and to me, like back then, you mentioned the the magazines are really, and occasional videos were the only real way to stay in touch with what was going on at the pointy end of the sport. So if you wanted to learn stuff, the further away you lived from one of those epicenters of the sport, the longer it took you to get that magazine or that video, and the longer it took you sort of to increase your levels of riding. You know, so I grew up on the mid-Atlantic coast of the United States in Maryland, and I was pretty far away from Hawaii and California, which was then, Hawaii was really the epicenter of the sport, and California to a lesser extent. So, we would see the mags, and you'd study the hand positions, the body positions of the riders, and that's really how you learn to do stuff, by being analytical. And I really feel like the riders that were super analytical of those little subtleties in the riding, in the pictures and the videos, were the ones that accelerated their skill levels the fastest. Would you agree?
100%. A new magazine could come out which would change the style of the way that we try to do maneuvers,
Yes.
I can remember seeing the first reverse off the top with Mike Stewart cross legs, and we were like, oh my God, you do reverses at the top of the wave with your legs crossed.
Yes.
And it was like a total change. Like, that's what we try now, everyone.
Right.
You know what I mean? And we had a little crew of, there's me, Anders, Marcus Veal, Johnny Burt, Daniel Swain, and we'd all just be like frothing to get in the water and try that we'd seen in the new Bodyboarding magazine. Jamie Murden was in the crew as well. It's like mad how much of a impact from landing on your your doormat, the magazine, to like within hours you're out there trying
what you saw,
like changing the whole approach to how all of you rode.
Yes,
so powerful.
It was, and back then I was a team rider for Maury, and they were really trying to promote the whole fun, family-friendly aspect of it. They didn't want photos that made it look dangerous.
Right.
They would try to get us to smile in all the shots. They didn't want us wearing wetsuits, because wetsuits are, cold water's a barrier to entry for the sport. So it was all about the family-friendly aspect, with the initial owners of the sport that bought it off of Tom Maury. Now, Tom was all about, enjoy the feeling. That was his initial slogan, right? Put your body on a boogie became the slogan later with Kransko, and it was all fun smiles. And then at some point, I feel like the turn came to more hardcore, right around 1990. Did you see the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think in 1990 for me there was more of a. It was between 1990 and I think, was it 94 that Eppo did the ARS, and 95 maybe. And I think for me that period was about technical riding becoming more of a feature.
Yeah.
I feel that after the mid-90s, becoming into the later 90s, it was then that there was the drive to make bodyboarding more credible by proving that it's more of a focus about riding waves that are unrideable for surface. That became the selling point and the credibility.
It was a total flip-flop from what was promoted in the 80s. Family-friendly, fun, safe, flexible. And all the interviews I used to do back in those days, we were sort of coached up to purvey that aspect of it. But then, as you pointed out, within 10 years, it had gone 180 degrees. And it was like, we need to make this sport look badass and hardcore. And these guys are athletes and they're daredevils. Yeah. And they're charging waves that surfers can't ride.
Yeah, that was 100%.
So it was literally in a 10-year period.
Yeah.
So, but let's get to the specifics of the topic here, and that is the demographics that participated in the sport. In the UK, how has that changed over the course of your bodyboarding life? In other words, is it the same age range still doing it that did it back then? What are we looking at over there?
Yeah, so I should mention that through my bodyboarding life, there was that era we just talked about, waiting for the magazines, lots of young bodyboarders, and then we had 360, our own bodyboard magazine, which I worked for, and through that period there was a huge grassroots involvement. There was adults running contests, whether that be parents or other peripheral individuals or companies that were running events and things like that. But there was a really big young person involvement across each area of the coast. So Newquay, Bude, which is also in Cornwall, Croyd in Devon, Wales, South Wales, do you know what I mean? All these pockets, Jersey, Channel Islands, all had their own packs of bodyboarders.
Yes.
And then they had their sort of top ranked bodyboarders, and they'd all come to these big events. And, we had the 360 bodyboard series back in the day, and there was like something crazy like 81 competitors in the open division in the rank list.
Yeah, I was going to say competition back then. There were so many opportunities, right?
Yeah, 100%. We'd be bodyboarding competitions every weekend, and I'm sure we'll come on to this later on, but that is the critical factor, isn't it? The competitions are which keep the interest, and as well as keeping the interest, they push the sports standards, don't they? And they give a focus, because that's where riders come together. You create the network of riders. You become friends with the riders from the different areas. Therefore, you end up going on trips with them or visiting them when the swell's pumping, things like that. But also, at the competitions, you want to be the best. So you push your riding to that extra notch because you're in an event. So it was kind of a catalyst for keeping young people engaged.
Yeah, and they all fed each other. The competitions fed the local clubs, and the magazines fed the kids and the competitors, and the videos gave them something to target. And it all sort of worked in symbiosis. There were national tours in many countries, including in the U.S., where I competed on what was eventually called the Bud Pro Tour. But there were also amateur events. There was the BIA in California, the Eastern Surfing Association and the Western Surfing Association, Hawaiian Surfing Association. All these amateur organizations had bodyboarding divisions. So that basically gave young riders a path to the top. They said, okay, I'll start here in this amateur thing. I'll work up hopefully to the domestic pro tour. And if I do really well on that, I might be able to get a sponsor and go on the world tour, which we started in 1994. Yeah. So it was all working in symbiosis, I feel like, to feed more young people into the sport. And it all began, I should back up a little bit, with Tom Morey, who sent Patty Serrano out to do these jamborees, which were basically free events at beaches around the USA, where she would come in with a bunch of boards and let people try them for free, and then she'd have a fun contest where they could, hey, let's compete against each other, even though we've never ridden one of these boards in our lives. But it worked. I actually went to one of them, and that was just another way to get new people into the sport. So it was all happening, and I think it was the same in Europe. There was a European tour. All these different countries had their own tours. Brazil, which still has competition, Japan, and so forth.
Yeah.
And then something changed in the sport. What changed, Rob? Why did things change? Why did it suddenly, national tours disappeared, money disappeared, and so forth? What's your take on that?
Well, it's a real tricky one to answer. I think it's a combination of things. So the first thing I'm going to say is the introduction or the development and the widespread use of the internet created a difference, didn't it? So that immediately pretty much immediately killed the print magazine, didn't it? So print magazines couldn't generate advertising revenue in order to pay their staff to create, and the publishing costs of creating the magazines. Therefore, the regular focus of bodyboarding, which was like monthly or bi-monthly, was immediately lost. So that was that. And that was not replaced by a regular sort of feature or regular delivery through the internet. There was an amazing explosion of footage of videos and, then social media, and everybody was throwing clips up, which was insane, do you know what I mean? It was almost like, instead of having a focus, it was just a swamp, for want of a better word,
yes,
of footage, and there was difficult to find the quality, there was no one curating it, and you were like, okay, I can kind of cruise through my feed and have a look on YouTube and occasionally come across some gold, but to get there, I have to wade through the mire of kind of poor quality, poor shot, not so good footage,
Yeah.
you know what I mean, that wasn't necessary to your taste, because the magazines were created to the taste of the reader, weren't they? They took feedback and they were sort of evolving and things like that. So that was one thing. The other thing I think was, it was around the time, you know, there was a global economic crisis, wasn't there, which changed a lot of things. I can't say that that would have a direct impact on bodyboarding because of the bodyboarding, you know, easy access, low cost entry to the sport, things like that. I think that there was, or I know personally, there was a definite filter down from the top riders that it was uncool to do bodyboard comps.
Wow.
In the UK, I stopped doing events, as did other riders, and I was judging events that I was of the same age and ability, essentially, of the riders. But I was just like, nah, I'm not really doing comps. Isn't really my thing anymore.
Too cool.
Yeah, exactly. Now
Wow.
looking back, I'm like, why did I do that? Do you know what I mean? But it was kind of like a lot of the pros were doing that, and we were like, oh, that's kind of the cool thing to do.
Yeah.
You don't bodyboard and do comps in these waves. You do comps in these slabby waves, and there was like this real push to make events in ultimate slabby waves, wasn't there?
Right.
And actually, unbelievably, that kind of had the reverse effect of, do you know what I mean? It kind of made it cool and elitist rather than the doors being open to say, hey, come in and try bodyboarding. This is a great way to enjoy the waves.
Yes.
So it actually funneled the number of bodyboarders that were interested and involved in it and that had credibility of it down to a real minimum number, and reduced the participation in the events and reduced the organisation of the events. And that actually reduced the grassroots involvement and the kind of open entry, should we say, for young people to start jumping into contests. So, yeah, a few different reasons, Jay.
Yeah, I always point to also the fact that in the early days there were maybe 5, 6, 7 bodyboard brands. So all the bodyboard sales were going to those brands. There weren't a lot of cheap EPS boards on the market. And now there's, in 2024, I don't even know, 100 bodyboard brands out there.
Yeah.
High end, there's probably 40.
Yeah.
And they're all, here's the pie, right? There are 5 companies slicing up those pieces of the pie, all taking a good chunk. Now there's 40 all dividing it up, and they're all just getting a sliver. So none of these companies can afford to send riders on the tour anymore. As Rob, you pointed out, the digital age really put the kibosh on print media and on videos because it's all instantaneous on the internet. And so, you know, riders today struggle to make a living at this sport. In fact, you know, in my day, there were 25 pro bodyboarders. That was our full-time job, and now there's 2, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know, not even 2. I'm thinking of Tanner McDaniel is literally the only one I can think of that doesn't have a job other than being a pro bodyboarder.
Yeah.
Just off the top of my head, I can't think of anyone else. So that just says it all. And he's world champ, and current world champ, I should say. And that's, you know, that's a testament of things as they stand now. We haven't had a competition circuit in California for a couple of years. The California bodyboarders tried to do a few events. They did some events. Kudos to them. Bodyboarding US did a couple events, but they saw waning numbers in the registration at these events, and a difficult time finding people to finance the events. So I don't know how is it in the UK and in Europe in general? Are there still competitions on a regular basis?
Europe, yeah. Europe's pretty healthy-ish, I reckon.
Okay.
You know, I see events going on, you know. I believe the ETB Tour is still going. I'm a little bit out of touch, I must admit. But I think the other thing, which we haven't mentioned, I'll come back to that. Certainly in the UK, there's a lack of events. So yeah, there's something called the Cornish Bodyboard Series, organised by Danny Catton, and they do a couple of events a year. and they're well attended. And I think if there were more, there's a Welsh bodyboard national championship, and there's an English bodyboard national championship, which didn't actually go ahead this year due to conditions, but it did last year. So yeah, that's pretty much all the events. There's not like a tour anymore, things like that. But yeah, I think a critical part was when I was coming through doing events, we always had aspirations of getting into the British team to then go and compete in the European Championships or the World Surfing Games.
Right.
And my daughter now is surfing, and her aspirations are to get into the British team to compete at the World Junior Surfing Championships and things like that. So that's why it's kind of awakened me, because they're all really competitive. I'm like, oh yeah, that isn't a thing anymore. There isn't an ISA World Bodyboard Games, and there isn't an ISA World Championships that has a bodyboard division. So we used to be super fortunate. We'd make the British team, and we'd go with the best female surfers, the best longboarder, and the best open surfers, and you'd go to Brazil or South Africa or wherever the World Championship was, and then that would be the way that you'd meet all the other bodyboarders from all around the world, and you'd then make that network, and then that made it easier to travel around the world to do World Tour events and things like that. So that was a massive hit, which I think kind of slid away without anyone really noticing at the time. Do you know what I mean? It kind of went, oh, we're going to take this division out of the World Surfing Games, and we're going to make the World Bodyboard Games their own standalone event.
Right.
And after 1 or 2 years, that just didn't happen anymore, and then it just wasn't anymore. So then in the UK, there was no focus from the national governing body to do a bodyboard event, because they had nowhere to send them.
The ripple effect was very real.
Yeah, and whilst I'm just on one, Jay, sorry, I'll shut up in a minute, it was kind of born as well out of the Olympic recognition of surfing.
Yeah.
Made the national governing bodies go, wow, surfing is getting recognised by the Olympic Committee. That means that funding will be available from Sport England, as it is in my country, or Sport the Brit, whatever. And therefore that funding needs to be applied for, but to be able to get that, we need to be doing a certain amount of things with the UK surfers or the English-British surfers, and therefore the big focus then goes all about surfing, getting the kids through, doing all the grassroots stuff, doing all the girls stuff, ticking all those boxes so that they can now go, can we get funding please? And then they get the funding like they've got in England. Yeah. And therefore they know that makes a really strong sort of system, but that bodyboarding has been fallen into the shadows.
Yeah, so, just along those lines, you have the WSL, which has all their events, really slick webcast, and, the pro surfers are put on these shows, like Stab Magazine has their How Surfers Make a Living, and all of this gives young kids who are getting into wave riding sports something to aspire to, whereas with bodyboarding, we don't have that level of promotion. There's just, the money is just not there. Obviously, the surf industry is driven by apparel mainly, whereas the bodyboard industry is driven by the boards. That's the high profit item, and it's not even a high profit item. Like, the margins are slim on bodyboards, folks. Trust me, as a retailer, we don't make anywhere near what you make on apparel by selling bodyboard gear, hard goods as we call it. So, yeah, that impacts it too. So, just to morph that into the demographic thing we brought up at the beginning, so here's what I've noticed in the U.S., and you can tell me how it is in the U.K. In the last 4 years, since COVID took over and all the gyms were closed, people were working from home, there were no opportunities to go to the mall or go out and to concerts, people were home with basically disposable income, and they were looking for stuff to do. So it's outdoor sports. And I found, and this is still the case now, that we now have a massive influx of what Gianna Simonelli, one of my former employees, coined board-agains. Right? Like born-agains, but board-agains, right? What these are is they're older riders in their 40s and 50s that used to bodyboard in the 80s and 90s. They stopped doing it for whatever reason, had a family, started working, and because they didn't have anything to do during COVID, they said, I used to love to do that sport. I'm going to get back into bodyboarding. And that is a huge part of our customer base. These older riders, these board-agains as we call them, coming back into the sport. So and to dovetail into that, the occasional bodyboard event that happens, at least in California, the Masters division, which is 40 and over, is the first division to fill up every time. And they can't fill the juniors divisions.
Insane.
So like this event, we had Drake Kinghorn here, which is like a shining star out there, this young kid, 14-year-old kid from San Diego that came here to Maldives to compete. Did I say our secret location? I'll have to blip that out.
Is he 14?
He's 14.
No way.
And he's 6'3".
Wow.
Gigantic. And
Crikey.
but he is the exception.
Yeah.
And he says it. He hardly ever sees kids bodyboarding where he lives either. So he's almost a one-off. And there are pockets of bodyboarders in California of younger riders, but not many. There's just those few spots like in Newport Beach or at Salt Creek or at the Wedge, but everywhere else is like small pockets, almost like it was in the early 80s.
Yeah.
So that's the demographic for us in the USA. What do you see? Do you see a big age range of people participating in bodyboarding still in your neck of the woods?
Yeah, there isn't a huge age range. It's exactly the same scenario. For me, at Bodyboard Holidays, we have young riders join us, which is great. But we also have lots of what you would call board-agains, lots of people who bodyboard as a result of bodyboarding in their youth, and now they want to come back to it and they want to go bodyboarding with other bodyboarders and talk bodyboarding and hang out and have fun and be chilled.
Relive their youth almost.
Yeah. But do it in a way where they don't have the stress of worrying about being in the right place at the right time.
A non-threatening environment.
It's all managed, it's all managed. So that's really cool. But there is, it's interesting because doing these competitions like this Cornwall Bodyboard Series that Dan Catton and others have put together, you do get a little resurgence occur as the bodyboard events start kicking off. Do you know what I mean? It is the catalyst, I believe. But on that subject, something we haven't touched on is that back in the day, Moray Boogie would sponsor a bodyboard event because that was a real key way of getting the reputation of Moray Boogie out there. So I went in the Moray Boogie Pipe Masters. Everybody back then, it was board restriction rules, so you'd have to all ride Moray Boogies. They'd get loads of photos of people riding Morays. There'd be banners everywhere. It was called, they were the name sponsor, and that was amazing marketing for them, wasn't it?
Yes.
Whereas now, the marketing opportunities are so available to brands through Google AdWords and Facebook paid posts and all the other ways.
Yeah.
That again, it's another way that events are unlikely to happen because the sponsor isn't going to be able to get the return on investment, as transparent as they would from paying.
Exactly, which is a great point. The return on the investment is hard to measure.
Yeah.
Right? When you back a pro rider or an event, it's hard to measure what am I getting in return for this. But if you spend the money on advertising, you can directly see the result of that expenditure. So ultimately, I think sponsoring riders is about the reputation of the brand.
Yeah.
Really, you're trying to bolster the reputation of that brand.
But that's changing, isn't it? Because if you look at Nathan Florence as the prime example, he's sponsored by Florence now, isn't he? But he is associated with brands to surf slabs, to travel around the world on the World Slab Tour, but also to get footage of that and make his YouTube channel, which the brands love to be associated with, and they're linked at the bottom of the YouTube video, and they can see the click-through from there.
Yeah.
So your point of sponsoring a rider in order to have notoriety with that rider, name association, is one thing, but I believe that's a smaller thing compared to them tagging you in their content, linking you through from their content creation. That has to be a critical part of the success of a professional rider these days.
Yeah.
I think gone are the days where riders can just be the out and out competitor going and winning events and then getting loads of money thrown at them as a result.
They have to be proactive.
Yeah, they have to be media savvy. Put the time in on their Instagram, their YouTube, and all that stuff. So vlogging. Yeah,
we get that. We get people will message us and ask if we sponsor people through our brand Tribe boards or e-bodyboarding, and nowadays it's all about your social presence. If you have 20 followers on Instagram, how's that going to benefit me to give you free stuff? It's not.
No.
Now if you have 20,000 followers, okay, there's some eyeballs on your Instagram that will benefit me. Or you have a YouTube channel that has a lot of followers. So not only would that benefit me, but it benefits you because you're getting paid by YouTube if you have YouTube videos with advertising. So it's almost like you need to be a social media expert nowadays, in addition to having skills in the water. So it's a completely different landscape now. Totally different.
You've got to manage your own media presence, haven't you? That's
totally.
it, essentially. Yeah, 100%.
And we talked to Bego Martinez, who's runs the commentary teams on the IBC Tour, and she said in Chile, where she lives, a lot of young people bodyboarding, very few older riders down there. So it's a very youthful sport in South America, at least in Chile. And I found in Brazil, it was kind of a mixed bag of younger and older riders. Obviously, on the IBC Tour, there's the Wahine event, which it's an all-women's event, but there's young girls, there's masters, and some of the old pros are coming back, to again, recapture their youth, and they're still ripping. So it's weird. It's like the demographics different everywhere you go, I think.
But if you think about it, Joe, this has only really just struck me, from this conversation. The boom was in the late 80s through to the late 90s.
Yeah?
Agreed. So that age group has now all got that, that is my age group. I'm 48. And I've just got to the point where I've got 2 kids, I've got my businesses, I'm settled down, I can look at, this isn't the situation for me. I've always bodyboarded, that's been everything that I do, but the other bodyboarders of this age group are going, right, I've actually, that is what I love, that's what I had to kind of leave for a certain section of my life or not put as much energy into because I was building a house, building a family, getting my work-life balance in place.
Yeah.
Getting my career set up, and now I've got the time to do it. So now I'm really into it again. Let me go on your holidays. Let me buy the products. So it shouldn't really be a surprise to us. It's just a matter that surge has now had the resurgence in the the 20 years post that period.
Yes.
So, that it means that we need another surge to kind of then. Could come through again, but I don't know. I think that there's almost too much concern about, there's not enough kids doing it, there's not enough this, that, and the other. I think that at the moment the sport's in a pretty good place. If you look at the world of bodyboarding, I think the participation is pretty solid.
Yeah.
It's not as if I always get asked, do you think it's on the downward spiral? And I'm like, no, I'm still. See on the million feeds, every day there's new clips being posted from bodyboarders that are absolutely mad for it, that love, live, breathe, and they're so into it of all ages.
Yes.
Me and you have been surfing every dawn this week. You're 60, I'm 48. You know what I mean? It's like this bodyboarding thing is like in your blood, and you love it, and that keeps on rolling on and rolling on. And it doesn't really matter whether there's currently a young crop coming through. But no doubt, these things being cyclical, it will,
I agree. I do see those cycles, and I agree that the recreational side of the sport is doing just fine. Yeah. Plenty of people buying bodyboards. The population that I see that are getting older, I mentioned in the U.S., a lot of older riders back into the sport. They're doing it to get fit again, in a lot of cases. And I think that push for health and fitness just is nothing but good.
Yeah.
It's a good thing. It gets people back in the water. And, the fact that you run trips and you have a lot of older bodyboarders on your trips, you have all ages, but a lot of older riders is a testament to people recognize the health benefits of being out in the sun, being in the ocean, moving your legs and hands. And I'll be honest with you, you know, I'm a former World Tour competitor, and I actually love going on the trips with you guys because, you know, it's people of my age range, and it brings me back to why I started this sport, which is really just because it's fun. I don't really like to compete anymore. I just want to go out and have some fun waves that aren't going to kill me. And I feel like a lot of the people on your trips are of that like mind. So, yeah.
Yeah, but they're definitely not all board again. You know what I mean?
No, for sure, yeah.
A massive a stack of the conversations I have on my trips are, oh wow, I wish I'd found this earlier. You know, I really wish that I'd started bodyboarding earlier. You know, I do this as much as I can.
So they're bored for the first times.
Yeah, totally. And they're like, but also, you know, the younger people. It's an ageless sport. I feel. You know,
yeah.
There's lots. You can go bodyboarding and meet other bodyboarders, and it kind of, I don't know. You rest of being a child when you're in the lineup, don't you?
Sure.
That's what it's all about. And
yes.
I've done a video about that. How, you know. With a legend from the trips who's a psychologist, and we talked about how you regress to being a child when you're out in the lineup, and why that is, because you're disconnected from your mobile phone, because you're away from land, and you know, you're unshackled by the burdens of everyday life, and it doesn't matter what age you are, you're out there to have fun.
Yeah.
And that will never go away. You know,
yeah.
That is the beauty of bodyboarding.
I 100% agree.
Yeah.
So let's just dovetail, and we'll start wrapping things up here, but let's just talk IBC World Tour. You and I do commentary on the World Tour sometimes on the webcast, and what I see on the World Tour is there's a lot of South American riders. That's Brazil, Chile, Peru. There's a couple South African riders, and there's a lot of European riders. That's the kind of the focus of pro bodyboarding. And the IBC, you know, is the most recent iteration of the World Tour. It started back with the GOB in the 90s, which eventually became the APB, then the IBA, and now, I know a lot of acronyms, now the IBC. So there's been sort of a rise and a fall of all of these organizations. Right now, you know, to me, I just think it's great that somebody's willing to put on a world tour, and somebody's willing to make the effort to make it happen. I think it's somewhat inspiring. We see a few new faces every time at some of these IBC events that you've never heard of.
Yeah.
Because they're inspired to compete against the world's best.
100%. So first of all, you know, we've said this many times, Jay, it's a thankless task putting on events. And that could be the root of the problem that this whole conversation is based around, you know. It's very rare somebody will walk up to you at the end of running a contest and go, thanks so much, Rob, that was an amazing event, you know, thanks for putting that on. They're more likely to go, oh, you shouldn't have ran our division when it was low tide, or you know, that judging decision was bad, the judges weren't paying attention, my wave got missed. It's just like, you know, it's not an easy thing to do. So to do that on an international scale, and to have the you know, the want and desire to do that, it is not a financially driven decision.
No.
You know, that is not a thing. I'm going to do a world tour to make myself rich. You know, there are much easier ways to make money, and much more fun ways.
Yep.
But the fact that there are people out there with the drive to make the world tour what it is incredible. You know, that's insanely good. So,
yeah.
The fact
you can turn off your alarm. It doesn't matter.
Thank you. The fact that there are thanks very much. The fact that those individuals are doing what they do, and then they are having to deal with keyboard warriors who are sat there saying, you shouldn't run an event in waves when they're below 2 foot. You shouldn't do this. You shouldn't do that. It's so hysterical. That's the only way I can you know. You can't be mad about it. You can just be like, how can this individual not understand the parameters that are in place to be able to create an event of this scale and magnitude?
Yes.
And then the things that are out of the control of the event organizers, of course they would love to do everything perfect.
Yeah.
But being able to do the best possible in the situation that they've got is exactly what they're doing.
Yeah.
You know? So, you know, the only thing that anybody should be doing is trying to support it. If they've got the energy to type a message about it which is negative, they've got the energy to be able to say, hey, I've got some free time, maybe I can help.
Sure.
Maybe this is something constructive that I could do to support
Yeah.
it. You know?
Nobody needs that headache to run an event. Everyone, in my experience working with them, is doing it because they love bodyboarding. And like you said, no one's getting rich. A lot of these folks that run these events are away from home for long amounts of time and not seeing their families, and in some cases taking off their day jobs. And that's, you know, this isn't what they do for a living. The people that run this tour, this IBC tour, they just do it out of the love of the sport.
100%.
So,
yeah.
But, you know, what I see... No, go ahead. Finish your thought.
They actually lose money by
They
doing
do in a lot of cases.
They leave their businesses at home or their employment at home to come and do something which will then essentially... I don't want to get into this too deep. I'm talking about most of the team to do something for the love of the sport.
Yeah.
Which they will be remunerated in some form for, and will have a nice experience most of the time. So it's not all, you know, it's not bad, but they'll essentially, if they looked at the brass tacks of it, they would lose money by doing it. So then to be, you know, reneged by individuals that are sat at home saying you could do this better, it's hysterical.
So, yeah, so along those lines, here's the one that annoys me is, you know, I see the comments online and people will say, I can't believe the tour doesn't have a stop in Australia and in Hawaii. So let me explain how this works, okay? The IBC Tour does not put on events. What they do is they provide infrastructure for existing events, and that's it. That's basically the most simple way I can explain it. So what happens is a promoter in Chile or in Maldives or in Europe comes to them and says, I want to put on an IBC World Tour event in my country and I want it to be IBC sanctioned. IBC then says, okay, here's what we require to sanction your event. We need this budget to be able to bring in a judging panel, scoring system, commentators, we need hotels, air tickets, food, caterers, all this is what we need to bring our IBC people to your event. And then the promoters go and find sponsors within their country or wherever. Usually in the case of bodyboarding in its current state, those are municipalities, recreation departments, national or local governments are funding the prize money and all of the infrastructure. And they'll get the funding and they'll come back to IBC and say, okay, here's the money, bring your staff. And they make it happen. And that is how the IBC events happen. So if you're in Australia and you are a promoter of an event, or you're in Hawaii and you're a promoter of an event, and you're willing to go out and find sponsors for the event and find the budget to bring in the IBC to put on the event or to do the infrastructure of the event, then by all means, please do. So if you think the IBC just says, you know what, let's do an event here, let's do one there, that is not at all how it works. So I think a lot of people, they don't realize that. They just think the IBC chooses where they want to do an event and then they make it happen. It doesn't happen that way. They're just a sanctioning body that provides infrastructure. They do not go out and set up contests. Promoters in the individual regions where the events are the ones that make the events, or put the events together, and then they come to IBC.
Yeah, they don't look at the calendar and go, oh, we're not going to do an event in Australia this year. We're going to ostracize that whole zone. But that isn't
they
how it
don't
works,
do that.
You know? Or California or whatever. You know, they support those that are supporting them. But just to go full circle with this, Jay, because this is something that's kind of a penny's just dropped in my brain as well. So if the event is being supported by the local government department, so the local tourism department has gone, no, we recognise that there is value in supporting a World Bodyboard Tour event in our area, the reason they're doing that is usually twofold. The first thing is they recognise that it's a very healthy sport for youths to get involved in, which in our world of challenges, keeping kids off computers, keeping kids from going off into a world that isn't great, not into a healthy lifestyle, that they are supporting that by putting on an event.
Yes.
So to go full circle, actually, a World Tour event is actually drawing eyes to bodyboarding, drawing young people, as we've seen with events around the world, especially Chile and Maldives, is that increases the participation in bodyboarding in that locale.
Yes.
And then year on year, more of those local young bodyboarders go, do you know what? I think I can give this comp a go now. And even if they're not like crash hot, they're like, I'm going to try this. And then they might not do great the first year, but then maybe the next year they're like, wow, this competitors, as we've seen in events that I've been involved in, this competitor didn't do great last year. And then this year they've come on, look how much they've improved. And then all of the locals are supporting them and they become a little bit of a local hero, and then more Groms look at that individual and they become a figurehead, an aspirational figure, and then bodyboarding becomes a thing in that territory, and then bodyboarding grows, and all of a sudden this sort of ripple effect goes out. So actually IBC Tour has a massive impact of positivity, of getting eyes on bodyboarding in that area, which is going to help the growth of bodyboarding and to help those locals to take the path into the ocean to do a sport which is accessible, whether they want to become an aspirational competitor or they just go, wow, look at that, it looks amazing fun, and realise you could do that in this place.
Yes.
I'm going to go and grab a bodyboard and do it, and then they buy a bodyboard from a local shop, which makes a sale, and then that benefits them, and then they import more bodyboards, so that you know I'm going with this.
No, you're right on the mark. And so for those of you that say, the IBC is a South American / European tour, well, there's a reason for that. It's because the governments in those regions recognize bodyboarding as worthy of their expenditure, and so they're willing to work with local promoters to put on events. Trust me, if there were more promoters in other places that were willing to get the sponsorship dollars together to bring in the IBC, we might see more Australians on the tour, or Americans on the tour. But there's a lot of sports and organizations and so forth in many countries competing for the same dollars, and maybe for whatever reason, those potential government funds are going to something else that the government deems more worth their expenditure. So, keyboard warriors, chill out. Trust me, man. These people that Rob and I have worked with, they're the genuine article. They're truly trying to make this. They would love it if it was all these different continents were represented on the tour. They would love nothing more than that.
Yeah, and I want to make the point really quickly, that the administration of nearly every event that I've ever been involved with, I've kind of gone, oh, that could have probably been a bit better. That wasn't perfect. The administration of an event isn't an easy thing, and everybody will try their best, and everybody will, they'll take feedback, but all the way to WSL and even the Olympics that have just been had, that everyone's like, oh wow, the seeding looked kind of strange in that, and the venue choice kind of was questionable, and then it was held at a time when there weren't so many sets and there wasn't so, you know what I mean? So everything's questioned all the way up to the very, if it's questioned the Olympics, every administration is questioned, you know what I mean? So it's like it's dealing with Mother Nature, it's dealing with local government agencies, dealing with local connectivity in regards to webcasting. It's like myriad of problems and solutions that, even superhumans wouldn't be able to make absolutely perfect, because everything's changing all the time. It's not soccer, is it? It's not football, we call it.
Right.
Morphing me into American.
All right. Yes, good point. Okay, so we made our point. We covered a couple different topics that are somewhat related. And any final words, Rob, before we check out here?
No, I'd like to say bodyboarding's in a great place. I think bodyboarding's in a fantastic place. There's so many good brands around the world doing good things, and lots of positive individuals involved. I'm absolutely stoked to be delivering bodyboard holidays around the globe, and it will never stop being an absolute joy to me. enriches me every time I spend time with you and with the individuals on the trips and get to know this amazing sort of collective of individuals. We're all a little bit downtrodden in a way, do you know what I mean? But
Underdogs.
See, let's say, is there another sport in the world where you see another person that does that sport in an area, and you immediately connect with them and say, hey, how's it going? You've got an immediate common thread.
Yes.
Talk to each other, you look out for each other, you've got common interests.
Yeah.
You know, that's an amazing situation for us to be in. So yeah, let's reduce the negativity, maximize the positivity, and yeah, enjoy it for what it is.
I love it. All right, so a big thank you to Rob once again. Rob, always a pleasure to have you on the Real Deal Show. And, next time we meet up, it's going to be in Central America.
It is, yeah.
In about 4 months' time, we'll be on the beautiful tropical beaches of Costa Rica and then El Salvador as well. And we always look forward to that.
We'd love to have.
Hopefully you guys can come along with us.
Sure.
Definitely check out those. The link, by the way, will be in the description to Rob's site where you can book that trip. So enough promo and bodyboard talk for now. We're going to get out of the sun. We're actually not in the sun technically, but we were before, and get a little rest and maybe get some more waves this afternoon. So on behalf of Rob Barber and myself, folks, thanks for tuning into the Real Deal Show. Subscribe to our YouTube channel, please, and give us the thumbs up if you like the content that we provided. If you're listening to the audio podcast, hopefully it got you through your drive or workout or whatever it is that you do. Laying on the boat, perhaps, while you're listening to a podcast, and like Rob did yesterday. And as always, folks, we'll see you in the surf.
Cheers, Jay.